do find it's one of the most artistic forms of IT in general. So before we decide to kind of dive into it, let's look at Forrester's definition of SOAR and really hit on kind of what's the critical pieces here. And the idea or the goal of SOAR is really to make security operations faster, less error prone, and more efficient. Make repeatable processes, make security operations quicker, equip them with the tools and the information they need to make decisions faster. That's what SOAR is about. So when you implement SOAR, what can you really expect from a SOAR platform, and what are some core aspects of SOAR that you might want to institute within your organization? One of the big ones is around triage. Help correlate alert data, reduce the noise, automate the alert triage. So when these alerts come in, we gather additional sources of information and we work to improve that, what we call mean time to acknowledgement. Get your analysts acknowledging that there's a problem quicker and have them focus on what matters most. Enrich those entities, or what we'll talk about is incidents within your SOAR platform. So an alert comes in, we need to know more about the user, the devices, the IP addresses. Give your security teams more information that they need so they can help automate processes throughout the environment. Empower your security teams to make decisions quicker. Last but not least is all about response, because I've always said that you can't respond to something if you don't have the core pieces of information to make that decision. How is a security analyst supposed to jump to disabling a user account or isolating a computer if they don't know exactly if that's an action that they should be taking? So if we think about where we want to drive automation and SOAR capabilities through security teams, one of the big ones is really around tier 1 and tier 2. Their goal and their job is to work on clearing that incident queue and providing deeper analysis and remediation. The goal of those tiers should be to drive as much automation as possible through those tiers. So helping clear that incident queue, helping triage the incidents that come in, helping gain additional pieces of information to ensure those security analysts having everything that they need to make the decisions on those incidents. And if we think about where the tiers spend most of their time, it's absolutely clear that tier 1 and tier 2 spend most of their time on triage. This is where we need to focus our efforts with SOAR capabilities. Many organizations, when they think about SOAR, the first thing they jump to is response. I want to generate a response action. I want to be able to disable a user account or isolate a computer. Very seldom do I have customers jump to the notion of helping with triage, helping with incident enrichment, because it's far more critical to get a handle over that piece before we just jump into the response actions. While the response actions are great, there's still a desire for SOAR. There's a lot more value in the triage efforts, and I see just so much more need for organizations with the triage aspect. So I'm going to dive into a demo and just kind of talk about these things and how you can really do some really cool stuff with triage around our SOAR capabilities. So in order for us to automate or execute SOAR, we need to understand what we're executing actions against. And that is ultimately what we refer to as entities, right? I want to perform some type of SOAR action on a device, on a user, on an email message, on an application, on an IP address. So I need these types of entities in my SOAR platform so I can know exactly where to execute my SOAR actions. And we make this process really, really easy with our E5 and what we call our XDR platform integrated with Sentinel, because we take an incident that has many different alerts, many different entities across mailboxes, users, and devices, and we synchronize all of that data natively to Sentinel, our cloud-native SIEM. So when those incidents come in ready to execute these SOAR actions on, I have all of my entities ready to rock and roll. If I want to execute a SOAR action on a certain workstation related to this incident, or a certain identity, or a certain IP address, it's critical that we have these entities and these informations within our SOAR platform to do these actions. So getting that data into whatever SOAR platform you're planning on using is absolutely key. So once those entities and those incidents are within our SOAR platform, we have a whole host of options of sort of doing automation. And I'm going to focus on what we have within the Sentinel environment to help automate those triage efforts. So, we've released recently a whole new automation module within Sentinel. And one of the things I really love is a whole list of playbook templates. There's tons and tons of playbook templates in here that you can rapidly deploy to your environment to take advantage of some really cool SOAR capabilities. I hear a lot of customers say, well, Microsoft SOAR only does Microsoft, and that is a complete misnomer. We have logic app connectors, which is the backbone of any playbook is logic apps. We have connectors. We have hundreds and hundreds of connectors, albeit almost 1,000 connectors within logic apps And these pre-configured playbook templates can touch everything from ServiceNow to Zscaler to Teams, everything within the Microsoft ecosystem, as well as things like Slack and VirusTotal and all kinds of different connectors that exist in the environment. In fact, if you just look at the connector reference overview documentation, there is literally thousands and thousands of different actions and different connectors that you can leverage dynamically within a logic app to execute these operations within your environment. So the first thing I want to think about when designing, a playbook is where should we be focusing our efforts within the environment? And I think, as we discussed, triage is one of those key focal points and those key efforts around, how do we basically should we drive automation throughout the environment? So I have an incident here, and an analyst needs to start interacting with this. And the first thing when an incident gets thrown within your SIM is you need to start thinking about how you're going to assign users to it. How do you want to assign analysts? And we released a really cool solution for this that allows to dynamically do automatic assignment via what we call shifts in teams. So this playbook is ready to rock and roll in the Sentinel playbook gallery. You can import it yourself. If you didn't know, there's this really cool what we call shifts module within Teams. So you can actually design a security operations calendar. So like a shifts calendar within your environment. Who's currently working on the SOC today? I can see here specifically that, I've got 2 users working on the SOC within the environment. And we basically released a really cool playbook that can basically automate those triage efforts. We released a whole article on this, exactly how to deploy it last year. I've been running this environment for almost, over 18 months, and it's never failed me whatsoever. Every single incident that comes in, this logic app runs. It's pre-configured to basically grab who's assigned to the incident. If nobody's assigned to the incident, it grabs all of the shifts that are currently available within the team. It checks incident workload. So which analyst is currently on the SOC working? What is their current user to incident assignment ratio? And then automatically assign those incidents to those users as those incidents come throughout the environment. So when those incidents come in, they can be automatically assigned to users within the environment. I've actually improved my environment even more by introducing the ability to drive Teams messages. So as soon as those incidents come in, it notifies the assigned user that that incident exists. It gives them direct links to the incident. It gives them the ability to chat with the owner, which is a really cool aspect. So you can dynamically, if I was a service manager owner or SOC manager and I wanted to say, who's owning this incident, I need to ask them some questions. I can very quickly dive in and ask them questions in regard to this incident. So this incident is basically here. We've sort of dealt with the initial incident assignment from a triage perspective. These incidents basically get created, our shift schedule happens, and our incident assignment occurs automatically. So incidents come in, they're automatically assigned. Now, the second step from a triage perspective is really to gather more information. This is the most critical piece of any SOC. Is I'm looking at this incident as an analyst, and I want to know more information. I want to start asking some questions about these respective entities that I had referred to before, right? As a security analyst, I want to know who the heck is this person? Who's their manager? Are they enabled for things like multi-factor authentication? What computers does this person use? Are those computers rampant with vulnerabilities? There's all kinds of different questions I want to ask to gather more information to really determine, is this an incident I should be concerned about, right? Same with IP addresses. What does our threat intelligence tell us about these IPs? Where are they coming from? Where have they been seen in our environment? Are they, what do we know about their locations and things like that? So there's all kinds of different data we want to gather in regards to these incidents. And this is where a bunch of our customer engineers inside of Microsoft started to develop this really cool module called the Sentinel Triage Assistant, or other words called STAT. And this is a really cool GitHub project that you can just go visit, ak.ms/sentinelstat. Two really awesome customer engineers, Pierre and Brian. I've actually committed some code through the GitHub repo to help improve these different modules. And the idea is every time an incident is thrown in Sentinel, we can gather all these different pieces of information very, very quickly. I can immediately know, is this user out of office? What is their out of office message? This might be really handy for the SOC to know, specifically if maybe the user's on vacation and we're seeing logins from that user from a different country or something like that. You might want to know specifically what computers that person's used in the last month and whether or not those computers have vulnerabilities in them. So all of these different, what we call sort of custom connectors within logic apps can be used very, very readily and very easily within the environment. And I can show you an example of what this playbook basically looks like throughout the environment. It's very, very easy to use. It's really, really cool. So the idea is this playbook was pre-configured to run anytime a new incident is created. So anytime a new incident shows up, we run this playbook. The base module gathers some initial triage data, basically what is the incident, what are some core data about the entities, and then all of these other really cool custom modules that are built in can just be deployed very quickly and very easily. The way that they're designed is what we call custom connectors. You can drop these in your own playbooks wherever you want. They're really cool, really reusable, really modular, which is the goal of any sort of playbook in SOAR operation. So, I'm immediately figuring out what is the risk level of the user? What do we know about these files attributed with the incident? What do we know about this person's computers that they've used in the last 30 days? And based on all of that information that's gathered, I might want to start now making some decisions on it. So the stat module runs, it gathers all of the additional pieces of data, and then we start adding some conditions. We start saying, okay, as a business, we've decided that if any incident gets thrown for a particular user, and that user has computers that are rampant with vulnerabilities, that user is running on computers that have, a high amount of vulnerabilities, or that user is a global admin, right? All hands on deck if we see an incident for a user who's an administrator. Or that user has, say, failed multi-factor authentication. If we're seeing repeat failed MFA attempts for that particular user, we might want to make a decision. So STAT gathers all of this information, and it actually has a new module that calculates an overall risk score based on the data that it collects. And what you can then say is, based on all the information that's been collected, you can now decide whether you should elevate the severity of the incident or maybe decrease it. So this gives you the opportunity to have all your incidents come in, the triage work runs, gathers all the data that we need, and then scales the severity up and down based on the evidence that was gathered. So your analyst can focus on the critical pieces of information that matter most. So if I look at how this basically manifests itself, I'm a security analyst and I see this particular incident, multi-stage incident involving initial access and defense evasion. I come in here and I start asking a bunch of questions. Well, those questions that I would normally ask and have to spend maybe an hour searching for a standard security analyst job, I can click the comments tab within Sentinel and I can literally get all the information I need. So I can scroll to the bottom. As an analyst, I now know who this user is. I know who this user is, who this person's manager is, what their manager contact data is, what administrative roles that user is a part of, whether or not this person is registered for MFA, what those registration methods are. So a lot of core details about the users who are tied to this particular incident. I can see specifically what locations this user has been working at in the last amount of time. I can see 97% of the time they reside in Canada, but there's 8 activities that are coming from Germany for this account. So some interesting information that I might want to weigh into my decision or dig into further. I now know this person's out of office, what their out of office message is, maybe any inbox forwarding rules that I might want to be concerned about. If an attacker has gotten into that person's mailbox and has, added a mail forwarding rule to exfiltrate data, that might be critical in my decision. I now know specifically where this account is within Active Directory, what OU that might play into your decisions throughout the environment. I know specifically now from an IP address perspective, what these IPs are, what country they're in, what organization owns them. I can see this is a TELUS IP address that exists in a certain city. I can see all the related alerts that might exist for a user. So now I can understand, whoa, there's a lot of different alerts coming from this person's machines. I can see anywhere this particular IP address has been used in the environment. I have a custom query here that gathers a bunch of additional data from a triage perspective. I can see that there is a domain controller here that's accepted an inbound connection over RDP. That might be a big concern for me, and now I have that information. I don't have to go looking for it. The other thing that we can do is some pretty cool information in regards to hyperlinking. So here is an example where I have a link to the user account and a link to the person's devices. Here's all the computers this person's used in the last 30 days. That might be a way that I can sort of dive into external pieces of data. Now, while I do link to our EDR platform, Defender for Endpoint, you could do the same thing with a different solution, something like McAfee or Symantec or CrowdStrike or Trend. It doesn't really matter. The idea is these modules run, they gather additional sources of data, they add comments with that direct linking. So if I wanted to say, yeah, let's dive into some further tools to show me more information about this user, I can click that link in question. I can get taken directly to that person's user page. I can see everything that I need to do about that particular user in question. I can look at, this incident in question. I can go back. I can click on any one of these devices, dive directly into the device page, and see all the vulnerabilities on those particular devices. So I can very quickly pivot to external systems to gather additional sources of data and link to other systems to help with my triage efforts. So what's basically happened in this particular case is our stat modules run, it gathered all the insights responsible for this data, and it's made sort of an overall determination of the risk level attributed with this incident. Based on all the related alerts, the threat intelligence data we collected, we've calculated the overall risk score of this incident is an 89. And there's all kinds of different ways that you can weigh in to the calculations that we make within these stat modules. So the idea is the stat module has basically run, gathered a ton of data, and it's ultimately determined that this incident is considered high risk. So it's taken an incident that maybe was a medium severity, and it's dynamically scaled it up to a high risk level to basically indicate, hey, based on all the evidence we collected, there is some concerns here and we need more action within the environment. There's also ways that we can tap into third-party data. I really like the ability to tie into other third-party data sets. One of the companies that we acquired is called RiskIQ. So RiskIQ is a threat intelligence company, and we acquired them last year, and we're looking at rebranding it as Defender Threat Intelligence. But today, the way RiskIQ integration works with Sentinel is almost exactly like the stat module. Anytime an IP address is found, it queries RiskIQ, gathers the evidence that RiskIQ knows about these IPs, and surfaces that evidence directly on the incident. So if I want to know more about this IP, there's a direct link to show me exactly what components are running on this IP address in question. So I can literally click that IP address. I now know this is a TELUS IP address. I can immediately see who is data, and I can immediately see what components are running on this IP address from TELUS. I can actually see this is my Plex server running on my home IP address. So RiskIQ is gathering all kinds of threat intelligence out there about external attack surface and things like that. And this can be very, very valuable for an analyst to dive into an IP address, dive into a host, and see what RiskIQ knows about this data throughout the environment. So we've sort of scaled the incident up, we've scaled the incident down, we've determined to make a decision, we've automatically assigned an analyst to the user. This incident is ready to rock and roll. So what happens now if the analyst doesn't respond, doesn't action upon this incident in a set duration of time? You might say, look, I want to ensure that any incident that's a high risk, that gets thrown in the environment, I want to make sure someone actions upon it within a certain amount of time. So what we can do to automate this even further is deal with the escalation process. And I really, really like this one. So there's lots of different ways that you can do this. One of the ways that I really like to do this is through an application called PagerDuty. PagerDuty allows you to define on-call schedules to kind of iterate through users, ping the first user, text message them, phone call them, move on to the next one, move on to the next one, finally move on to the manager. So I actually leveraged my own playbook through PagerDuty to deal with this incident escalation automatically. So it's really neat, and it's super simple. It just grabs any incidents that haven't been modified in the last hour that are of what we call a high severity, right? Stats already analyzed the incident, determined it's a high risk level. Now my escalation playbook is going to run to grab all incidents that are high risk, that haven't been touched in the last hour. And for every incident, just call PagerDuty API and open an incident within PagerDuty. So in real time, I can basically show you how this works. So from a demo perspective, I'll just enable this and kind of run it ad hoc. But the idea is what's going to basically happen is PagerDuty within a few seconds is going to call my phone and basically let me know that an incident exists and I need to action upon that incident in question. So there's the incoming call from PagerDuty. There's the text message. Here's basically a screen call from Google because you can't quite hear the audio, but it's kind of neat because PagerDuty will actually recite to you what the incident is. So you'll see PagerDuty say multi-stage attack incident involving initial access and defense involving one user, press 4 to acknowledge and 7 to resolve. So we've been able to automate the entire process of triage from the initial incident assignment to the initial information gathering to the actual escalation if a user doesn't respond in time. So here we can actually see the incident was opened in PagerDuty because it's currently sitting at a new status. It's now going to iterate through all the different phone calls that are attributed with my queue within PagerDuty, and away she goes. So there's just tons of different ways that you can help automate triage efforts within your environment. I just love the stat module. Go take a look at it. The work that Pierre and Brian and myself are doing around these different stat modules, it's awesome. We have a great open source community. They're always asking for feedback. If you want to see new things in stat, you want to see additional modules, please let us know. So in closing, when I think about some cool tips around automation, some key things that I've kind of seen at a lot of different customers is automating everything may be worse than automating not anything at all. If you decide that you're going to automate the disable of every user account anytime they see a certain risk, you're going to have a lot of unhappy users. So choose initial use cases with very low user impact. We don't want to institute automation that breaks things, that hinders productivity. Focus on the high ROI on time savings in regards to triage and enrichment. As I showed, these are where your tier 1 and tier 2 are spending the most time. This is where you want to drive automation to get the most bang for your buck without any impact to users or productivity. Second, spend time on the front lines. Spend time with your tier 1. Ask them what they're doing on a regular basis over and over and over again. Make sure you're fully aware where the need is from a SOAR perspective through your tier 1 and tier 2. One thing that worked really well for me in the past for other organizations, and this was more in regards to ITSM and automation, have an open feedback form. Have a form in Forms or SharePoint that anybody can submit and say, I do this one thing 10 times every week. It takes me 15 minutes per time. Is there a way that we can automate this? And you would be absolutely shocked at the sheer quantity of things that SOAR could be applicable for through your environment. So before you just jump to these are great use cases for SOAR, think about where the need is the most. Design your playbooks intelligently and effectively. Personally, and this is my own preference, I love to utilize simple, basic API call activities. These are just straight HTTP calls that drive APIs, because the idea is if you start using a lot of proprietary or out-of-the-box connectors, many organizations switch SOAR platforms. It's happened in the past where an organization had to switch from one automation platform to the other. And if you've got a bunch of connectors that are very proprietary to the system, it can be a nightmare to migrate them from one platform to the other. There's also the idea that not every connector out of the box is going to do what you want. If something like PagerDuty was a good example, is our PagerDuty activity that we had in Logic Apps didn't support all of the cool APIs that PagerDuty used natively. So I actually chose to just use a native API call to do super simple stuff as opposed to the existing PagerDuty connector within Sentinel. So lots of different ways that you can accomplish it, but definitely think about designing your playbooks as small, repeatable pieces of code, i.e. the example in the stat module, those custom connectors, so you can just deploy them wherever you want throughout your environment. Second, don't automate things that are already done. I can't stress this enough. Focus on integration before automation. So focus on integrating with the existing tools that you have that may be already doing automation. A great example of this is our Defender stack has a lot of automation built in. We have what it's called automation investigation and response on our endpoints, on our email. So why would I decide to automate something that our tools already do? So get to know your existing tools, know your XDR, know your EDR, know your SIEM, know your SEGs, know exactly what your tools can do, and only think about executing SOAR and automation with things that aren't existing within your wheelhouse. And as I said, that integration between SIEM and XDR is key, because that really takes the initial effort over getting ready for SOAR. All of my incidents are natively in my SIEM. If XDR detects a new entity, a new user, a new computer, that data is there, ready to go in Sentinel, ready to execute SOAR actions on. So those are some simple examples, some cool tips. Last but not least, go ahead and visit any of these particular links if you do decide. Lots of really, really cool examples out there. of how to get value out of the Microsoft security system. We have lots of new virtual training days coming up as well. And with that, I think we are at time and ready to kick over to the panel discussion.